Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another Future Focused weekly update where we are keeping you 10 steps ahead as we live life at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. I really look forward to doing this. I know I started this at the end of last year, and I really do enjoy the conversations, but the time I take and the interaction I have with those of you who listen as you send things along and ask for input or thoughts or reflections on some of the different things popping up I've really grown to enjoy this. So thank you all for your eager participation in this. And I'm glad to hear that you find this helpful. So today, well, before we get into it, I don't normally make asks and I will not make a habit of this, but if you have found this show beneficial or helpful in any way, shape, or form, would you do me a favor and would you go out to whatever app or whatever you're listening to it on and just give it a rating? And if you have the time, give it a review, maybe even share it with a friend. I would appreciate that so much. Like I said, it feels weird for me and I'm terrible at asking for help from people, but that is just one of the best ways that this show can continue to grow and ultimately help people, which is really why I do it, because I understand it is a confusing and overwhelming time with everything going on. And for many people, this whole tech front is a lot to take in. And so my goal is to make it easier for people, but I can't do that if they don't know about it. So there you go. There's my plug, my ask. If you would do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. Now, today, I've got 5 things on the agenda. Some are light, some are not so light, but I want to keep you ahead of where things are going right now. So let's start on the lighter side because it is Friday. I think we can all laugh on this one. So one of the things that was brought to my attention this week, if you did not look this up, in Glasgow, Ireland, I believe. Now you can fact check me on this one if I got the location wrong. But if you have not heard about this Wonka, I don't even know if I would call it the Wonka experience. It's Wonka gone wrong is really what it is. What this is you want to talk about overpromise and underdeliver. This was one that made some headlines here. Now, you might be going, what does this have to do with future focused and the intersection of tech and humanity? And when you look into the story and what I'll share with you, you're going to see where this comes in. So essentially what this was is somebody had this great idea to say, hey, let's create a Wonka experience and we'll invite people in. We'll make some money doing it. We'll make kids happy. And it accomplished none of those things. But the way they were able to draw so many people was they used AI image generation for a lot of, well, and I'm sure they did more than image generation with it, but they used AI heavily to market and promote this thing. So the images that were used to say, this is what you're going to come experience, this is what you're going to see, a lot of the text around it was when you look at the marketing materials, you can definitely tell this was AI, and that's no secret. The problem with that is these beautiful, dynamic, compelling visuals did not match the experience of what people were met with when they showed up at this thing. There were kids crying. In fact, the police were called because people went, this is not it. And if you look at the pictures or videos, you can find them everywhere. It's like a rundown warehouse with some inflatables and they took these AI images and printed them on stuff and hung it up on the wall. I mean, it is bad. It's really, really, really bad. Now, you might think, okay, so what? What does this all mean? And what does this have to do with things? But as I watch this, what some of the underlying things that come out of this that I think we all just need to be more cautious of is AI has given everybody superpowers in many regards. Things that people had no skill or ability to do, they now can do. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you can do it very well. And I've seen this a lot with content that's created. You can just have AI just churn the stuff out left and right. But one of the problems is if you don't have the underlying skills, if you don't really take the time to do things right, AI does not fix that gap. And I can't remember if it was the live conversation I had this week or one that's coming up that's pre-recorded. There are some things that AI is just not going to help you skip. You just cannot skip certain steps. There are just certain things that you have to do. If you're going to deliver a Wonka experience to children and families, you can't just create some flashy AI images and marketing materials and then think it's going to be okay. And clearly, this was an example where it was not okay and people reacted accordingly. And I think that's one, a caution to users of AI. If you think, hey, I can just use these AI tools and really I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm really trying to accomplish. And I really have no skills in this, but I'm sure AI can make up for it. It's not going to happen. And this is a prime example of this. If you have not been in the event business, if you do not know people in the event business, creating a compelling experience, an event experience, especially an in-person one. Well, virtual ones are a nightmare too, but creating a dynamic, compelling experience requires a lot of skill and talent and hard work. And you can't just throw generative AI at it and think it's going to fix it. And I think that's the lesson that everybody can take from this, because there's a lot of people right now I know that are looking to say, hey, how do we shortcut this stuff? Is there a quicker path to get from point A to Z? And maybe AI can just help us not only go through the alphabet, but maybe just jump straight from A to Z. And the reality is, AI may be able to short circuit some of those things, might be able to speed up the process. But if you just try and skip the middle, it is not going to go well for you. Now, that's to the people out there who are listening, considering, hey, how might I use AI? You're still going to have to put in the hard work, is the lesson you can take from that. For those, though, who, as a consumer, I think this also raises a lot more awareness of, hey, we need to be much more careful about how we make decisions, the way we consume information, how we go into things, because AI can, on the surface, create the impression of things that there's really nothing underneath it. So it's much easier to get deceived. I think we're seeing this in misinformation, content that's being created. But this was a real example of, hey, it looked good on paper, but all it took was tearing that tissue paper back to realize it was a garbage heap right behind it. And so as you're thinking about what you're going to do, or how you're making decisions or where you're going forward, and you're doing it based on, well, I saw this thing, or I read this thing, or I heard this thing, be very careful. I think that is the biggest takeaway from this. But again, if you just want an entertaining look at somebody using AI, well intended, and it not going well because you just don't understand what really goes into it, take a look at this Wonka disaster. All right, next up is some interesting research coming out. I saw this on NPR and then a couple other sites. There was this extensive, it was over a year now, study. If you haven't been following kind of workplace trends, there's been a lot of heat, or not heat, but just discussion around the possibilities of a 4-day work week. And can it work? Would it be successful? Is there any way that that can actually happen? And 61 companies in the UK ran a trial over the last years to see, is this possible? Could we actually successfully run a company while having employees work 4 days a week? And the data's in. It's actually going really, really, really well. There are improvements to the physical and mental health of their employees. Job satisfaction is dramatically rising. Burnout is down. It is not a novelty. It is not a flash in the pan of, hey, is this just a thing that'll be cool for a week and then everybody just goes back to it? But as I dug into this, because I've worked with other companies who have discussed and debated whether this could be something for it, I think one of the things that is coming through is I was reading through some just different interviews with companies that were involved in this, who have continued to participate, because there are some examples. So if you want to look for why a 4-day work week won't work, again, this is your cognitive bias. If your goal is to see it's a failure, you will find examples of companies that participated in this, that it did not go well. So is a 4-day work week the magic silver bullet to company performance, company, employee satisfaction? Is it some sort of magic wand for that? The answer is no. It's absolutely not. There is not a one size fits all. And actually, some of the articles that I think took a balanced approach to this, because of course you had the hype ones that said, see, 4-day work week is the magic bullet. But some of the other ones that I thought took a more thoughtful approach said, this wasn't a one size fits all thing. And it requires a major commitment. Even going back to my previous note about the Wonka, the Wonka Vader, is the companies that did this, there was a massive amount of work that went into this, and it was a large commitment by the whole company to do it. So for people who may be considering a 4-day work week, or even thinking like, hey, maybe this could be viable, don't think, just like the Willy Wonka experience, don't think you can just say, all right, everybody, we sent out an email and told everybody you only have to work 4 days now, 4 10s, and you're good. Because there's policies, reading some of the stories of where it didn't go well. There were customer expectations that they didn't anticipate. There was a lot of different things that went into this that made it a challenge. And I can tell you right now, I've talked to some companies who have tried this and it has not gone well. I've talked to some employees. Honestly, I've seen survey data on this. Not all employees even want a 4-day work week. And this goes back to where if you listen to any of my stuff on how we need to approach organizational performance and culture, any sort of one size fits all thing is probably not going to go well for you. Now, if you can get to a point where as an organization, you go, hey, we're just going to commit, we're going to be all in on this. It's just going to be part of our ethos that we have 3-day weekends and that's how we do it. Good for you. And I think if you stick to that, I think you'll see benefits come from it if you really go all in on it. What I think is not going to go well is some of the folks who may see this data and go, hey, let's run this as a pilot or as an experiment. And they kind of haphazardly throw this out to the organization and say, hey, we're going to do this, kind of like what happened with remote work and hybrid work, where people were trying to figure out how to do it and they didn't really empower their teams to say what really makes sense for you and make that decision. Now, I understand a 4-day work week is even a harder thing to navigate than hybrid work, because now if you tell people, well, it's 4 days, but you can pick your day, I mean, you really are going to struggle with this if you try and haphazardly do it. But I think the point is, one of the biggest underlying messages in this that I think everyone can walk away from with is more is not necessarily always better. More and faster does not always get you a better result. And just even looking into some of the productivity statistics from this report and some of this study or whatever it was like a trial, they actually are seeing higher levels of performance out of the organization, which the math doesn't always work when it comes to people. And that's one of the most unique and curious things I've seen when it comes to spending a career working with people and human psychology and human performance is sometimes the most counterintuitive things actually end up being the most powerful lessons. And so does it surprise me that letting people work potentially 32 hours, because not everybody even went 4 10s, some went 4 8s, and they actually saw higher performance because people brought a better version of them, of themselves to work, and they had more capacity, they were more innovative, they were able to do some of this stuff. To me, what this can be indicative of, that I'm hopeful of, is that this is where we can start to look at how can AI improve work. And it's not just how at companies do we just churn out more, but how do we actually improve the quality of life for the employees so that they're actually giving 120% because they have the time and space and capacity to do that. And so again, it was just a really interesting thing that I think should be encouraging to folks. Now, I know there's going to be folks that listen to this that are naysayers that go, oh, there's just no way. You can't possibly do it. I think between what we're seeing with burnout and all this other stuff, what we know about just human performance, and where we are now with artificial intelligence, I absolutely think we can get to a point where we can actually make work better and give people back more time. Now, this opens up a whole can of worms, but that's something, if you want to check it out, it was a really interesting trial. I was really not surprised, but pleased to see the results. And even the ones where it was like, wow, this didn't work for us. Really, there were very nuanced things. And my honest opinion is the ones that didn't work, they just didn't really commit to it. It was more of like, well, we kind of tried it and it failed. So, all right, let's switch over to item number 3 for this week. If you did not hear, Apple, I actually, I knew about this, but had forgotten about this. If you didn't know, Apple was in the business of electric vehicles, or at least they were trying or considering getting into the business. So maybe some of you go, I didn't even know they were in that space or considering going into that space. Well, they were. So there's the first news update on that. But if you were looking forward to a titanium, beautifully designed electric vehicle coming out of Apple, it's not happening because they have completely pulled the plug on their electric vehicle initiative. And this has been in process for over a decade. So this is actually a pretty significant thing. It's not like they just decided they were going to explore it and then it died on the vine. They have completely shut that down, and they are shifting all of that focus and effort into generative AI. And so this to me is just again indicative of where things are going for anybody who's still maybe on the fringe of, is AI really, really going to become like electricity or the internet where it's going to be everywhere? Similar to the Apple Vision Pro and Apple getting into the spatial computing space, Apple starting to make bold moves into the generative AI space is indicative of, I think, just more and bigger things coming down the pipeline. So no news on this. I think 2 updates ago or something like that, I mentioned that Apple was starting to toy around and we're making announcements that later this year we'd be able to expect to see something from them. I'm actually really interested to see where they go with this, if I'm being completely honest, because whenever Apple gets into the game, it's very indicative of a shift in the industry. Whether you're an Apple hater or an Apple lover, it's very indicative of something bigger going on in the market. And secondly, when they get in, they don't get in like in, we'll kind of dabble. When they go big on something, they go big on it. And I'm interested to see where they go, especially around what you're going to hear on some of this generative AI stuff. I'm interested to see what flavor they bring. And even if we start to see Gen AI, 3.0 or 4.0, or even if a new emergence of what generative AI started, it's going to be interesting to see where they go. But again, Apple shutting this whole electric vehicle thing down and shifting basically all of those resources. Unfortunately, some people, were impacted through this whole thing. They weren't able to mobilize that talent. But it's going to be interesting to see where things come in the end of 2024. And again, I'll keep folks updated. I'll keep you all updated on where things are with that. But if you didn't know, they were in the electric vehicle business. They were thinking about it. Now they're not. And they're all throwing those efforts at artificial intelligence, which gets me to the next one. I don't know whether I'm sad, laughing, happy. Like, I don't know how I feel about this next one. If you have not seen this over the last week, and it continues, and I think we're just going to see more of this, generative AI has lost its mind. And not completely, but it's having, over the last week especially, and it's been happening for a while, and it happens in pockets and spurts. But this last week has really headlined on some of AI going absolutely bonkers. Now, there's different flavors of it, so I'm going to break these down into different categories because some are one, really, there's 2 categories of this that I'm going to talk about. One is, if you haven't heard about the Google Gemini image generation thing, that's one flavor of AI gone mad. And then there's what I would really truly consider AI gone mad, which would be ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, which was another flavor of madness that we saw over the last week. So let's talk about the Google image generation one first, because to me, this one, I've actually not been a fan of a lot of the way this one has been framed up and some of the narrative around the Google Gemini one. Now, if you haven't heard it, essentially what happened was Google Gemini started producing non-historically accurate images. So people were showing all these images of, look, I typed in, create an image of the founding fathers, and the founding fathers it created were black, and they weren't actually black. And so it created this whole boom of people saying, Google's turned their generative AI woke and all this stuff happening. And to me, it just shows where we are in terms of an understanding of how this stuff works. Now, granted, Google has come on record saying, hey, we made some mistakes with how we had fine-tuned our algorithm. And I understand in some ways they kind of have to, because people are so upset. And I get some people listening to this may be upset that I'm not on the Google's woke train type of a thing, but I'm not, because I understand how this kind of stuff happens and what's going on. And it's not these nefarious people in Google sitting around a conference room going, how do we change history by making our Google image generator create Black founding fathers? That's not what's happening. If you understand how AI is trained, you have the ability, there's natural bias built into it, and you're trying to deal with factual reality with, you're mixing creativity with it. And so when you're doing this, you're trying to find this fine line of like, well, what's biased and what is factually accurate and what is somebody actually looking for? So when somebody asks a question, can you create and again, this goes back to trying to be more inclusive. And this was to combat, and I will admit, they turned the volume up way too high on this. But essentially, if you think about this in simplistic terms, what happened was, if you know, back in the very early image generation days, which wasn't really all that long ago, but if you think back to this, if you asked, create me an image of a group of people, because of how the AI was trained, 99% of the results you would get would be a bunch of middle-aged white dudes. No matter what you asked, create me a group of people, middle-aged white dudes. Create me a diverse group of people. You get a slightly variated mix of middle-aged white dudes. Maybe some females mixed in there, type of a thing. But it was not terribly balanced to the reality of the world we live in, which is the world is not middle-aged white dudes. But a lot of the data that's on the internet, because that's how AI is largely trained, is inherently biased because of, and again, this isn't necessarily always this devious thing so much as, hey, the stuff that gets digitized, the voices that are the loudest, all the stuff that gets baked into the system ends up creating this. And so what Google had done is said, well, let's try and combat this by balancing the scales a little bit. Well, when you try and balance the scales, it's a bit of an art and a science. And this just to me shows how we are still learning so much about how to use generative AI and how AI works in general. And that you try and do the right thing by balancing the scales by saying, hey, we don't want our image generation to create a monogamous, just monolithic future when people are trying to be creative and do this stuff. So you tune the dials to say, well, make it more inclusive. Well, now somebody says, create the founding fathers doing this. And these ways of training the AI to counter the bias inherently in the AI kind of malfunction. And they go, oh, okay, well, we're trying to be inclusive, so we don't want to create a group of middle-aged white men. Not taking into account, you just asked for the founding fathers who were middle-aged white men, and it doesn't have context. And this goes back to people not understanding AI does not have context. It does not understand. It really doesn't understand what you're asking. It knows it in terms of the text inputs based on its data set and is then creating something. So when Google tries to set this thing to be more balanced and inclusive of the world we live in, it doesn't go, oh, okay, right, but I get you're asking about the founding fathers, and that's a historically accurate thing, so I'm going to create that to be historically accurate. It's not thinking all these things. So that's where some of the reactions to it were frustrating to me, because I went, come on, this is a misunderstanding of how the technology works. Now, is this a challenge we're going to have to overcome? You better believe it is, because it's like, well, okay, how do we start to make sure that this gets it right? And Google took down its image generation. It has since fine-tuned it to be like, it won't do things with people till they can get this figured out. But if you're someone who saw this and just freaked out and thought, oh my goodness, this is horrible, what is Google doing? My take on this is just the nature of how this stuff works. Now, the ones that are a little more like, whoa, what happened here? If you look up what happened with ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, this is one where I get, people got a little freaked out by. It literally went mad. It's like Uncle Louie who just at Christmas went on a bender, and you're like, what is going on with this thing? And I mean, as an example, people were just getting zany, bizarre, crazy prompts. Things like, I'm in the room with you. It was saying creepy stuff. So I can see where people rightly freaked out and went, what? I was asking you to help me with my show notes and you just told me I can unleash my army of drones and robots to hunt you down. And these are legit quotes that just out of nowhere, AI just started blurping these things back out at people. Now, there are a lot of folks trying to figure out what happened and why it's doing this. And is there something that provoked it? Or is this just the instability of the AI models? Again, it's math. It's pulling from different things and it's doing what it thinks you want, but inevitably things can go haywire, and that's what I've seen multiple instances of over the last week. So if you haven't looked at some of these things, check them out. Now, if you look at this and go, "Oh my goodness, the AI is possessed, it's coming for us, it's taking over." I don't think at all that's what's happening here. I think we're seeing technical malfunctions where the AI is pulling from some random source and it's misfiring and generating and shooting out these responses that have, and again, it has no context. It doesn't, while it feels like you're interacting with a person, you're not. You're interacting with an algorithm. And again, if you've ever interacted with someone who has serious mental health issues where the wires are not firing in the right order, that's kind of what you're dealing with here. Is it's like, what just happened? So it did go insane. We probably are going to continue to see this. And I think this should be an indication to people of why we need to be so careful how much stock we put into artificial intelligence and its ability to make decisions and do things. It is not 100% reliable. And I think that's one of the biggest marketing myths that's out there right now. Is there's a lot of marketing out there going, this is 100% accurate, it's safe, it's, all these other things. And it's like, well, first of all, one, people aren't 100% reliable. I mean, we all know that person that's just lost it and you're like, what on earth happened? Now, granted, they have a black box just like AI does. You're like, I don't know what's going on in its head that led it to throw a temper tantrum, but it obviously did. For some reason, something happened, and we may never know really what it is, because just like a person may not actually be able to communicate what's going on, it can't always either. But it's not conscious, so we can't even really work with it to get to a point where we can send it to AI therapy to work this stuff out. So my caution to people is just really be careful how you're using it. And again, this goes back to my earlier point with Wonka, the Wonka Vader. You got to be so careful as you're consuming content and you're consuming things, or you're asking generative AI, hey, help me with this, or what should I do about this, or help me build this other thing, that you're not just handing over the keys and going, I'm sure it'll be fine. No matter what happens, it'll be fine, because it's AI, it's technology. Technology doesn't break. It does break. And we just saw this on steroids over the last week. So all that to say, don't be freaked out by it, but also this in some ways I think is an encouragement that, hey, we still got plenty of room for people in this mix, no matter how far AI comes. And two, just watch what you're doing and don't hand over the keys to this. I gave the example of what happened with Air Canada yesterday. I think there's a lot of people, going back to the 4-day work week thing, that are trying to shortcut. How do we get from point A to point Z? And can't AI just fill in the rest of the alphabet and we don't have to do anything? And it can't. It can't. There are no shortcuts in this stuff. And so some things are just still going to require hard work. And as much as AI can help, it may actually cause more problems than good. So be careful is all I will say on that one. Well, I guess I said a lot more on that one than that. But all right, last but not least. Oh, the last two are heavier than usual. The robot apocalypse. Let's talk about the robot apocalypse. Now, you've heard me talk about Musk's Optimus program, which I continue to be kind of like, whoa, that's moved really quick. Now, one that I knew a little bit about, but has much more come onto my radar. If you are not familiar with Figure AI, don't look it up right now until you've heard my thoughts on this, because it may very well take you to the post-apocalyptic Skynet moments if you go to the website, to be completely honest with you. But essentially what this is, I started digging into this more because I saw more of the big tech companies starting to back it. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? So now OpenAI and Microsoft are jumping into the mix, uh, as well as Jeff Bezos, NVIDIA, Intel, LG, Samsung. And it's a company that specifically focuses on humanoid AI, or not humanoid, humanoid robots. Now they're really going to be focused on converging this with artificial intelligence. And if you're brave and you want to know what I'm talking about, go to figure.ai and look at these things, and you will see they are the things that nightmares are made of, that they're creating. Now, is it as, Black Mirror and end of the world as I think some people are making it out to be? No, but it definitely has a look coming right out of science fiction, and they're not helping the situation by having things like the master plan as one of the major navigation points on the website. So I understand where there's been some hype around this thing of, oh my goodness, like here comes the robot apocalypse. Now all big tech is in on this and the end of the world is at hand. I mean, and they did for a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people in the space who are very close to robotics and tech, and we're like, who is this company? Like, I haven't even heard of them before. And they're valued at $2 billion now. I mean, they're a sleeper. They were a sleeper company that I think many people in the industry knew nothing about, that has been making some serious progress on it and suddenly caught the attention of the big dogs. And now everybody's jumping in on this. So if you're thinking, oh, we're never in my lifetime going to see robots walking around doing things, I will, if you want to make some bets, let me know and we can go set a handsome wager on who's going to be right on this. But I think the thing about it is, and this is where I just want to encourage people to slow down a little bit. I understand why we're getting here. And what it is, my thoughts on this are, it's this combination of, we already have robotics. That's not new. We now have a powerful generative AI, but right now they have not really necessarily mixed. And it's kind of left this like, so what's next? Because we are starting to reach the ceiling of what we can do. And I actually think it's disappointing. I take that back. We are nowhere near the ceiling of what we can do with it today. The challenge is, you always have people that, one, aren't looking at all the things that are still left on the table. And then you've always got your folks that are trying to push the boundaries as far as they possibly can. So of course there are going to be people going, yeah, we've got this, computer and mobile-based generative AI, but how do we give AI hands and feet and ears to take this to the next level? And so it doesn't surprise me one bit that we're already there and that we're pushing hard to say, well, yeah, of course, like let's take this, let's merge these together and let's see where it goes. I will say I get a little nervous at how quickly we're moving with this stuff because, like I said, if you talk to people a few years ago, they would have said, robotic. I actually just listened to one of the top leaders in the tech space, and he had said, it's going to be 20, 30 years before we really see robotics, especially humanoid robotics, take off. Robotics are super advanced already, but humanoid robotics were 20 years. And this was not that long ago. This was 6 months or something ago that he was saying this. And now, I mean, if you like having nightmares, go spend some time on their website. We are not 20, 30 years from this stuff. And as we start to merge artificial intelligence, we are going to get closer to an AGI, or at least the perception of an AGI, where it actually has spatial context. It can touch and feel. It can see and hear. It knows its environment. And again, this is where I was on a podcast recently where people misunderstood me because they thought I was saying we're going to get to true sentient or conscious AI. I actually don't believe we will ever get there. I don't think it's possible. But I think we are going to be able to get to a point where what we have is indistinguishable to us. I don't think we will be able to fully understand the difference between the two. And so as we start to combine humanoid robots with generative AI and we have these autonomous beings moving around, doing things, making decisions. I mean, honestly, this is where I continue to try and encourage people, slow down a bit before you jump in. So if you hear this and you're thinking, hey, great, I can't wait to sign up and get some of these things in our shop floor, I would say, hey, you might want to hold back on some of this stuff because, again, the market is going to drive how quickly this stuff moves. And if we're sitting here demanding these things, it's going to happen a lot faster. If we start to pull back and say, can we wait and see? Because if Copilot, if Copilot and ChatGPT could throw a tantrum where it starts threatening to, send a robot of army of drones to hunt you down, or you must worship me. I mean, these are exact quotes. I'm kind of looking at them off to the side. If you refuse to worship me, you'll be considered a rebel and face severe consequences. If ChatGPT is doing it, it's freaking people out enough. And that's just happening in a text-based 1990s RPG interface, and it's sending people off the rails. Clearly, we are not at a level of stability where we want to put this stuff in a robot, send it out and say, hey, why don't you watch my children type of a thing. Even if I don't need to play this stuff out. We've all seen the sci-fi movies to know that we just probably need to slow down a bit. But for those of you who may not be as familiar with it or think, we got decades, if not centuries before we reach that point, we are not. And now that I've hopefully, I don't know if I've calmed you down or made you more nervous based on this update, but whatever it is, check out figure.ai and take a look at what they're doing. And then again, if you start to put the pieces together of who's getting involved and who's starting to make massive investments in this, where that's going, I think we're going to see some things changing really quick here in the near future. So with that, I hope that everybody can walk away from this going, I feel more informed. Maybe I'm a little freaked out, but I don't think we need to be concerned. I don't think worry and anxiety really ever does anybody any good because nobody performs their best when they're scared. So please don't take any of these updates as fear mongering or trying to make you more worried about it, so much as that you're aware of it so that we can be informed and make wise decisions and influence this in a positive way. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Like I said, if you get a minute, please do go out, give me a rating and a review, and share this episode with your friend. And with that, we will see you on the other side.